Welcome to this online course content that supports preparing to take the Maryland Tree Expert exam. The supplemental presentation to the study guide is intended to aid those individuals who are preparing to take the Maryland Tree Expert exam as required by the Maryland Tree Expert licensing law. Anyone seeking to practice or advertise tree care services in the state of Maryland must obtain this license from the Maryland Department of Natural Resources. This presentation corresponds to the information in the online study guide. The text of the study guide, version 5.1, may be found at dnr.maryland.gov/forest. Click on the Urban and Community Forestry tab at the top of the page, and then Tree Expert Law in the menu on the left-hand side of the website. Maryland Tree Expert Exam Study Guide version 5.1, Chapter 6, Selection, Installation, and Establishment. The most important part of tree selection is matching the tree with the site. You want to plant the right tree in the right place for the right reason and in the right way. Before conducting any tree care practice, it is important to first ask the question why. The answer to this question will often guide the steps taken in the tree care needed. When planning to select and install a tree, consider these three main areas. What are the site conditions and considerations? What tree or trees will you be planting, and what are the tree's needs? And what is the purpose of planting a tree or trees? Let's look at each of these a little more closely. One of the most important parts of tree selection is matching the tree with the site. If the site is underneath an overhead utility line, for instance, you want to plant a small-scale tree with a decurrent or rounded branching pattern. Other site considerations might include the adaptability of the tree to the site. Is it acclimated to plant in your area? What is the plant hardiness zone? Are the soils appropriate for that species or to even plant a tree? Is there sufficient space, not just for the tree when it's small, but for when it matures? Are there other trees nearby or other plants or turf that may impact the health of this tree? And what are your planting needs? Can the tree be watered? Can it be cared for? What are the tree's requirements? As far as size, how tall will it get? Is there sufficient space for it to grow to its intended height? How wide will the crown spread? Do not plant too close to a building, for instance, with a tree that has a wide crown. How much light does it need? Is there going to be sufficient sun, or in some cases, sufficient shade? Is water needed? Is it a drought-tolerant plant? Is it a moist-tolerant plant? Is there access to water if there's not enough rain? What colors do the leaves turn? Aesthetics might be your goal, and that could be a factor. What fruit does it produce? How often and how much? And does that complement the site or the goal of planting the tree? What space does it need? And that includes not only above ground, but below ground. What is the rooting habit of the tree? And is it hardy enough to survive the coldest weather predicted for that area? Starting your project with a clear objective or purpose is critical. Trees can provide certain services and products, and you need to select species that best meet your objective. Trees can provide shade, screening for wind and visual barriers, aesthetics such as fall foliage. They can provide fruits or nuts, or maybe you want to make sure you don't have fruits or nuts on the project site. Perhaps you want to increase your species diversity for tree health. Perhaps you're trying to meet a legal requirement and you need to make sure your tree selection meets the specifications of a legal requirement. Perhaps you're trying to aid in water quality or provide some architectural support to the site. There are many reasons that you may engage in a tree planting project, and be sure to be clear at the outset. Let's look a little more closely at the term plant hardiness. This refers to the ability of a plant to tolerate the coldest temperatures experienced in a particular area. And there are maps that you can check for the plant hardiness for that particular species. I just want to note in this map, you'll see that it's from 2006. We'll look at another date range on a hardiness map to show that this does change, so you need to make sure you're referencing the most current information. This hardiness zone map is from 2015. As you may recall from the previous slide, it was from 2006. In the previous map, most of western Maryland was in green color, and that would be hardiness zone 6. Just 9 years later, with the change in the map, you can see that most of Maryland is now in hardiness zone 7. So again, please make sure when you're selecting your plant stock that it is appropriate to the current hardiness zone. Another way to visually show the change in hardiness zones is this map that compares the hardiness zone for 1990 to 2015. You'll notice in the state of Maryland that most of the state has changed one full hardiness zone. All plant material should conform to American National Standards Institute Z60.1 American Standards for Nursery Stock. Required general specifications include for bare root and field-grown stock. Specifications shall include plant size by height or caliper as appropriate to the plant type. For container-grown stock and box-grown stock, specifications shall include plant size by height or caliper as appropriate to the plant type and container class or box size. Trees are generally available from nurseries in one of three forms. Bare root, which are small, easy to plant, easy to ship, they're lightweight, they're field grown, and they cost less. Balled and burlap trees are dug in the nursery. They can lose up to 95% of their absorbing roots. They do cost more, they're heavier to move, and they come wrapped in burlap that you have to contend with on the planting site. Containerized trees come in a plastic or natural pot with a soil mix, could include bark, compost, wood chips, as you see in this photograph, peat, or sand. For nursery stock that's less than 4 inches, the caliper is measured on the trunk at 6 inches above the ground. For nursery stock greater than 4 inches, caliper is measured at 12 inches above the ground. Before you accept any planting stock, the soil level at the top of the root ball or container should be examined in order to determine if the root collar is at the proper level. You can see in this photograph that the root flare is below the soil line in this pot. Trees with soil balls greater than 30 inches in diameter should be burlapped, followed by drum lacing with rope. Burlap should be biodegradable, but that's not always the case, and shall completely cover the root ball. Soil balls less than 18 inches usually do not have to be reinforced with cord or rope unless the soil happens to be sandy and the ball is apt to break apart. When planting a bare root tree, dig the hole 2 to 5 times bigger than the diameter of the stem at the root collar. The sides should be slanted and the depth the same or a little less than the root ball. The hole should then be domed in the middle and the tree set on the dome with the roots spread out around the dome. This should allow the roots loose soil to grow in. Do not expose roots to air as they will dry out quickly. Because the tree has a limited root system, it might need staking. Planting a tree with a taproot requires digging a hole deep enough to extend the root down straight beneath the stem. The hole should not be deeper than the extended taproot because the root collar will be covered by soil. Do not bend the taproot. When planting balled and burlap trees, remove the sod if present. Loosen the soil and remove it from the hole and slope the sides. Dig the hole a minimum of 1.5 times the diameter of the root ball. preferably 2 to 3 times the diameter of the root ball, not only to give yourself room to work, but also to loosen the soil for root development. Make the hole slightly less than as deep as the root ball. Make sure that there are no glazed sides in the hole. This is especially easy in clay soils, so you need to be mindful of that. Handle the tree carefully, not by the stem, so you avoid root breakage. If drainage is a problem, you can plant the root ball as much as 1/3 the height of the root ball above the grade of the soil. To eliminate settling in the bottom of the hole, it should remain undisturbed to give the root ball solid support. If you're planting a balled burlap tree, cut the burlap and twine. Remove the burlap from the top and sides of the root ball. This allows the roots to grow out the top and sides of the root ball. Fold the burlap down to avoid wicking. Make sure it is below the soil line. Remove it completely if it is synthetic, not natural burlap. If your tree comes with a wire basket, remove the wire basket completely if possible, or cut away as much of the wire as possible if not. Backfill your hole with the same soil unless it is very poor soil. In most cases, amending the soil with organic material will not be of any particular benefit to the newly planted tree. Make sure there are no air pockets, tamp it down with your boot, and that the trunk is vertical. Firm up the soil and water the tree. One factor about planting trees that needs to be emphasized very clearly is not to plant your tree too deeply in the soil. That root flare at the bottom of your young tree needs to be at the soil grade or slightly higher. Do not plant your tree too deeply. Under normal conditions, root growth is best encouraged by planting the tree evenly with the surrounding ground. In wet conditions where drainage may be a problem, raising the root ball 1/3 above the ground will aid the spread of lateral roots. In arid or dry conditions, a basin can be created to use to collect water. A containerized tree may be root bound when delivered. Separate and cut the roots, especially any kinked or circling roots. This will encourage the roots to grow out into the soil instead of continuing to grow in a circle around the tree. Circling roots are common in trees which were started in containers. Kinked and circling roots could reduce the growth of the tree or eventually even kill it. Remove the container before planting unless it is biodegradable, which is not common. The container should not be removed by pulling or leveraging the trunk of the tree. Appropriate removal techniques may include bending, wiggling, and/or cutting the plastic container away. When is the best time to transplant trees? For deciduous trees, it is generally best to plant after leaf drop or abscission in the fall and before leaf out in the spring. If deciduous trees that have leafed out must be moved, the use of anti-transplants may be warranted to reduce the possibility that plants will reach the permanent wilting point before, during, or after the transplanting. For evergreen trees, it is earlier in the fall and later in the spring than for deciduous trees. However, time to transplant can be species specific. Check first. When digging a tree for transport, a rule of thumb for the width of the root ball is a minimum of 10 inches for every 1 inch of trunk diameter. Make clean cuts and wrap with burlap if the root ball is greater than 18 inches. Balled and burlap trees with large soil balls should be drum laced with rope for additional support. Extra care must be given to trees with large taproots as they are harder to transplant than systems with fibrous root systems. It is important when selecting your species and your site location that you anticipate the height and spread of the tree at maturity. That includes the trunk. Check the proximity of the tree's location to hardscape features and utilities. You might also need to check the shade tolerance of the tree compared to the amount of light available on the site. Very large trees can be dug and transplanted by a mechanical device known as a tree spade. When using a tree spade, no attempt should be made to move trees that exceed the size limitations of the machine being used. To stake or not to stake. Staking is not always necessary for a newly planted tree. Staked trees often have smaller caliber, less trunk taper, and are more susceptible to tipping after the stakes are removed. Stake if the site is windy, has sandy soils, if you're planting a taller tree with a large canopy, or if there's a lot of pedestrian or equipment traffic in the area. You may also want to use a stake to protect from vandalism or mower and weed whacker damage. If a single stake is used, place it on the upwind side. Trees greater than 4 inches in diameter often require guying. Trees are guyed with 3 or 4 wires anchored to the ground, as you see in the rightmost image on your screen. If installing trees over 8 inches in diameter, support the tree with 4 guy wire of 1/4 inch 7-strand cable, 3/8 inch lag hooks, turnbuckles, and deadmen. If using metal stakes, wooden stakes, or I-screws with turnbuckles as devices for staking and guying, check these several times a year to make sure the tree is not being girdled and that the system is still intact. Remove wires and tags to prevent girdling. Tree staking and wraps should not be left on for more than a year. If trunk wrap and staking materials are left on indefinitely, trunk girdling and constriction may occur, as you see in these photographs. To conclude the installation of your tree, be sure to properly mulch, add any tree protection devices that may be needed, such as the wire cages in this photograph, remove tags and nursery stakes, water if necessary, and ensure there will be an ongoing monitoring program to check on your trees. Mulches are materials placed on the soil surface around the tree trunk to reduce moisture evaporation and improve soil conditions. Other benefits include minimizing turf and weed competition, reducing soil erosion, improving soil aeration, moderating soil temperature, and protecting against mechanical damage from lawnmower and weed whackers. The mulch layer should not exceed 2 to 4 inches in depth and should not be placed against the trunk of the tree, as collar rot can occur. It should be a minimum of 3 feet in diameter around the tree and can be as large as you wish or can afford. Here is an all too common but improper way to mulch a tree. As you can see, it is too deep, it is almost 12 inches deep, and it is placed against the trunk of the tree. Immediately after planting or transplanting your tree, how should the young tree be pruned? According to ANSI standards, prune only dead or broken branches. If it is an evergreen, do not prune because there are no latent buds present. Do not prune the crown to balance with the remaining rootstock. The rate of recovery and reestablishment after planting and transplanting varies with tree species. The general rule of thumb for reestablishment in temperate climates is 1 year for each inch of caliber. As an example, a 2-inch caliber tree would take 2 years to reestablish. We hope you found this supplemental presentation to be helpful as you prepare for the tree expert exam. This concludes Chapter 6, Selection, Installation, and Establishment. Please proceed to Chapter 7, Safety.